The next keynote panel is a continuation on our highlighting the importance of having patients at the center of innovation. Importantly, as you heard this morning, a key element in any value conversation must include what matters most to those living with the conditions that we seek to treat or to cure. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the next panel of individuals who are not only facing their own personal battles, but who have stepped up to advocate for and to give voice to those who are counting on us to bring future breakthroughs and cures so that they and others can live their ideal. Leading this discussion will be Jessie Milan. Jessie is an inspiring national leader who's been living with HIV for 34 years. He's the interim president and CEO of AIDS United, the country's leading HIV public policy and advocacy group. He is also the board chair emeritus and current officer of the Black AIDS Institute and a former AIDS director for the city of Philadelphia. In 2015, he was appointed to the Scientific Advisory Board for the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. And prior to that, he served 5 years as a co-chair for the CDC and HRSA's Advisory Committee on AIDS. Jessie is a well-known leader in the search for public policy solutions for HIV disease globally and has represented the U.S. State Department in Africa. He's had numerous honors for his work in leading the national and international fight against HIV disease. He is a graduate of New York University of Law and Princeton University. Please join me in welcoming Jessie Milan to the stage.
Thank you, Patty. Thank you, Patty. Thank you so much, Patty, and thank you all, especially you, Patty, and you, Russ, for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm Jessie Milan, and I'm the interim president and CEO of AIDS United in Washington, D.C., and I have an announcement. I just turned 60. My staff gave me this card, and it was the first time I saw those two numbers next to each other, and they applied to me. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm really 60. And for a person who's been living with HIV for 34 years, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing, because we say in the HIV community, every year is a victory. And so I had to create a pretty special victory lap. My spouse and I cashed in a boatload, or I should say a plane load of frequent flyer miles, and we headed to the Amalfi Coast of Africa. And we were sitting in business class over the Atlantic with the flight attendant bringing me my white tablecloth and my filet, my Prosecco and my red wine at the very moment I turned 60. It was pretty darn cool. And you know, we have to celebrate these victories because, especially in the HIV community, those of us who've reached my age have such memories of people who didn't make it, of people who died, including my late partner who died 31 years ago when I was only 29. And he joins the 500,000 other Americans who have died from HIV/AIDS and the 35 million around the world who have died. You know, I'm still surprised when people learn that people are still dying of AIDS, even in the United States. 13,000 last year, 1 million around the world last year, another 13,000 this year, and another 1 million around the world this year. When I said that to the Senate Democratic Caucus just 2 months ago, 19 United States senators went silent. And they went silent because I told them that night I was going to a funeral. And the looks on the faces of those 19 United States senators looked just like this. They'd called together representatives of the LGBT community to show their support for the tragedy in Orlando. But I had to connect the dots to them because so many of the young people who have experienced the tragedy of Orlando in real time, gay men and other people who are 20 and 30 and 40, who barely remember or weren't even born when the HIV crisis started, this was the first time for them that they experienced the death of their peers. And so I had to connect the dots for these senators and tell them I was going to a funeral for a man who was not yet 40, who had died of AIDS, and his funeral was that night. Senator Al Franken, one of the funniest men of our generation, stopped and he stared at me and his eyes went gray. Senator Cory Booker came up to me afterwards and gave me a big hug. Only I wish that hug had been for Andre, who did not make it to the victory lap of his 40th year. But the good news is that because of the work and the vision of this industry, so many of us are making it to our 50th and 60th birthdays and beyond. By the year 2020, more than half of the 1.2 million people living with HIV in this country will have reached the age of 50. Already, more than 40% of us are. It is a great victory and a great cause for celebration. Now those 1.2 million people join the 117 million people that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, right down the street, tells us are living with chronic disease in this country. Parkinson's disease, cardiovascular, diabetes, on and on. So many of the issues that you are working on so hard. And all of us, the 1.2 million living with HIV and the 117 million other Americans, we do whatever we can to make the next victory lap. We take the pills. We take the injection. We drink the medication. I thought you might want to see what mine looked like. This is what keeps me alive. 2 of those pills are my triple combination therapy. That big pill is actually 2 drugs in one, and the small light blue one is the 3rd piece of my triple combination therapy. I take these every day because I know that if I don't, I'm giving the virus the opportunity to mutate or to expand and start to kill my immune system. All these other pills remind me of my 88-year-old father who says, and I quote, "I have a green one, I have a pink one, I have a yellow one, a white one, a purple one, and a navy blue one. Those all keep me alive because I'm 60. And I'm glad for the opportunity to take them every day." You know, nationally, those of us who work in HIV/AIDS, especially those of us who are living with HIV, we have sort of a national support group. And one of my great support group members is Phil Wilson, who's the founder of the Black AIDS Institute. Phil was one of those people who almost didn't make it out of the 90s. Phil was diagnosed with AIDS shortly after protease inhibitors became possible in the mid-1990s. But because of them, the virus has been contained, and he is now achieving, like I am, viral suppression, where the amount of the virus in our body is so small that it is clinically non-detectable. That means that the virus is not so strong that it's able to replicate and replicate and replicate and decimate my immune system so that I become susceptible to one of the more than 24 diseases that are floating around in this room right now, that if I contract them because I have HIV, I'm defined as having AIDS. It is tremendously helpful to know that what's going on inside my body is not that expansion of the virus, the expansion that caused all those deaths. Because Phil and I remember the looks on the faces of those men and women those gaunt faces filled with scars from Kaposi's sarcoma, looking back at you, knowing that the virus was in fact doing that and leading to their death. But not now. Now we have hope. Now we have hope. And I specifically remember the day that hope came to me. I was sitting in my office in Philadelphia as AIDS director, and my director of the Ryan White program, John Sella, came running into my office, the Ryan White program providing care and support for people with HIV. John Sella came running into my office and he said, "Jessie, this changes everything." And I said, What? Well, I'm going to digress for a moment because John was the director of our Ryan White program. And is anyone here who doesn't remember who Ryan White was? Ryan White was that young man, that young hemophiliac, we talked about hemophilia this morning, that young hemophiliac who was kicked out of public school because he had HIV. And he fought so hard against the stigma and the discrimination of having HIV that he won his right to go back to high school. Ryan White died at age 18, 5 years before protease inhibitors were even discovered. If he were alive today, 26 years later, he would be 44 years old. He'd be 2 years older than Andy Lippman, who we're going to hear from later this afternoon on our panel, who's 42 years old and living with cystic fibrosis. It would be amazing if the spirit of Ryan White was part of this panel to talk to us about what it felt like to be hopeless, not to have hope. But I digress. So John Sella came into my office screaming, "Jessie, this changes everything." And what did he mean? Well, he had an article in his hand about protease inhibitors and how when a protease inhibitor in combination with 2 other drugs is given to a person with HIV, the virus starts to retard, creating viral suppression and not that expansion that could lead to an HIV/AIDS death. I think back many times on John Sella writing to my office, and I thought his moment for me was like that eureka moment. Eureka! And I've often wondered, did those scientists who determined the efficacy of protease inhibitors actually want to scream, "Eureka"? I've wondered if they wanted to run down the hall and open the window and yell to the 36 million people living with HIV, "Eureka! You get to live. You get to love." And 36 million people would start cheering, and it would be a cheer louder than any Super Bowl or Olympic game that we've ever seen, because of the possibility of being able to live and the possibility of being able to love. And now, because of antiretroviral therapies, if you are 35 years old and consistently have a suppressed viral load, you have the possibility of living to 77 or even 81 years old. No wonder these boys look like they're enjoying the sunshine. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I've learned that if you're 60 and have viral suppression, there's a chance you may live longer than your uninfected peers. That's a thing of beauty. But it is not true for everyone. This, too, is a surprise to our American congressman. We have something what we call the HIV Cascade that starts with new infections, considers the status of the 1.2 million people living with HIV, of whom less than 90% know their actual status, and it cascades down to how many people are actually on these antiretrovirals in the United States. Only 36%. How many are actually achieving viral suppression? Only 30%. 30%. In the United States of America, 70% of the people living with HIV are not yet accessing enough of these drugs to achieve, as I have, viral suppression. And they're not, so what do? Well, fearing that we were headed so clearly in the wrong direction, there was a major advocacy effort by patients like myself, and I was part of the key advocacy for this. In the United States, we give $20 billion away every year to other countries for them to address the HIV epidemic, and we require that they create a national plan. We had never had a national plan in the United States. So during the presidential election of 2008, a coalition of HIV advocates, especially as patients, went to the Republican camp and said to candidate McCain, and we went to the Democratic camp and said to candidate Obama and to candidate Clinton, will you promise to have a national plan for HIV/AIDS? And they all three said yes. And President Obama followed through on that promise, and in 2009, he issued the first HIV/AIDS plan in this country, a national strategy. And it has four major goals: to reduce new infections, to increase access to care and improve health outcomes, and to reduce health-related disparities and inequalities based on HIV. Oh, and also to ensure a better coordinated federal response. But what was amazing is that after dialogue across the country in town hall meetings, this document also has a vision for what is possible. And that vision is this: the United States will become a place where new HIV infections are rare, and when they do occur, every person, regardless of age, gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, or socioeconomic circumstance, will have unfettered access to high-quality, life-extending care free from stigma and discrimination. This vision has galvanized the HIV community and corporate America as well. BMS, Bristol-Myers Squibb, Johnson & Johnson, V Pharmaceutical are all behind this vision, and everything they do is working to achieve this vision and these goals. We could slip in any of the diseases we're talking about today to this national vision. Wouldn't it be wonderful if this vision existed for Alzheimer's, where there is still stigma and discrimination? Wouldn't this vision be wonderful if it applied to Parkinson and to all the other diseases that you are talking about? That's what patient advocacy can do. So what are we doing? Well, for 2020, the national plan has been updated, and our goal is by 2020, 80% of people living with HIV will be virally suppressed. We got a lot of work to do. And on the global community, UNAIDS has set the goal of 90-90-90. By 2020, 90% will know their status, 90% will be on ARVs, and 90% of 36 million people will be on ARVs. These are aspirational goals, and the entire community and industry worldwide is behind achieving these goals. So how are we doing? Well, in the U.S., we got a long way to go between now and 2020. And globally, less than half, only about 17 million people, are on ARVs and have virally suppression today. But there's also great hope on other fronts. Living with HIV may also make it possible to love with HIV. Treatment as prevention. We now know that if you are virally suppressed, there's a more than 96% chance that you will not infect someone else. Tony Fauci and others have said that there is not a single documented case anywhere in the world where a person who is virally suppressed has actually infected someone else. Oh my God, that's amazing. And last month, At the National Ryan-White Conference, an official from NIH actually used the word non-infectious. Eureka! Oh my God! People living with HIV have been waiting for that one word our entire lives, ever since the moment we found out we were infected. The fear that we would infect someone else. And now the thought that we might be uninfectious is actually spreading across the HIV community like wildfire. We're actually helping people understand that this may change your perception of yourself. You're not a vector. You're not a thing. You're a person. And now you may be able to love. Let me tell you, for heterosexual couples in Africa, this is huge. This is huge news. And if treatment as prevention isn't good enough, we also have pre-exposure prophylaxis, or PrEP. The FDA has approved PrEP. If you take it daily, that little blue pill, which I actually take every day as part of my combination therapy, you take it consistently, there's a 90% chance that you won't get infected. This opens up amazing possibilities for the HIV community worldwide. So we all now have the opportunity to have goals for ourselves. You know, I met Russ Allen doing some executive coaching and leadership development, which I'm sure he'll be happy to tell you about. And we all know that we have to set goals, right? Goals for ourselves, goals for our industry, goals for our company. Setting those goals, I was a vice president. I've been a vice president in both for-profit and nonprofit companies, and now I'm a CEO of a big nonprofit. And all of us set goals, and a lot of them have to do with financial targets, and woe to any of us who don't make them. But we also set goals for our personal lives, And I learned that my goals were not about titles and income. I learned from this woman, my mom, that my goals needed to be a little bit different. My mother died 2 years ago of ovarian cancer. This industry is still working on finding a solution that would have helped her. This picture was taken the week of her 80th birthday. She wanted to see a Broadway road company production of Sister Act. And it was fabulous. And then we gave her a surprise party, which is even more fabulous. But the week after her birthday, she went into hospice. And she set as her goal, calling to her bedside every one of her children, her grandchildren, and her sons-in-law. And she did. And she said to each one of us individually, "Thank you, and I love you." She met her goal. She met her goal. So I had to start thinking, well, what is my goal now that I've been given this opportunity to live a normal life? Well, these are my two nieces. This is Courtney and Milana. They're 13 and 14 years old. And my goal is that they see me in the bleachers when they receive their diplomas. My goal is that they see me sitting in the pew when they walk down the aisle. My goal is that they hear my voice when they call to tell me they've given birth to their first child. That is what I aspire to, and that is what ARBs will make possible for me. The night of my 60th birthday, my husband, Bill, we've been together 28 years, and that's 8 years legally married. I'll give you a story about how you can get to 28 years later. Bill said to me on the night of my 60th birthday, "Jessie, let's grow old together." When I think back on the day that George died 31 years ago, I never thought I would be able to hear anyone say those words to me. But now it is possible. And so my hope for people living with chronic disease, the 117 million Americans of us, that we will all be free to live and free to love, free to give all the love that's in our hearts, and free to receive all the love that we need and deserve. That's what your industry is making possible. And I cannot thank you enough from the bottom of my heart, because you're making it possible for my dreams and for 117 million others to come true. Thank you. Well, you've heard from me, but I'm going to bring up some of my new friends. We're going to have a panel discussion on patient perspectives, what it's really like. So I'd first like to bring up Andy Lippman. Andy is a longtime survivor of cystic fibrosis. He's been a board member and senior staff at the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. And Andy's going to tell us a bit of his story. And Suz Schrandt. She's Director of Patient Engagement at the Arthritis Foundation, and she's going to tell you a little bit about her story of living with chronic disease, and we're going to have a little conversation. So please welcome Andy and Suz. So Andy and Suz, before we begin, why don't you give us a brief introduction, and then we'll start talking about some of the questions that we've discussed before. So Suz, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you so much, and it's really great to be with all of you today. As Jessie said, I'm Suz Schrandt. I just recently joined the Arthritis Foundation as their Director of Patient Engagement after working for PCORI, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, for about 4 years. And really my whole career has been around health policy and patient advocacy, and you'll hear why that's such a personal cause for me here in just a few minutes.
Good, thank you.
My name is Andy Lippman, and first of all, I love these chairs. It's very nice. So I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a native, not many of us around, but I have cystic fibrosis. I had a sister before me who passed away from the same disease, and therefore I started a foundation called the Wish for Wendy Foundation, which has raised nearly $3 million for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. Just really quickly, when I was born, I wasn't supposed to see my teens, and here I am. I just turned 43 years old, and looking forward to many more years, thanks to all of you.
Great, thank you. So thank you, Andy and Suz. So I remember vividly the day that we learned that George had AIDS back in 1985, just about Easter time, and by Christmas he was gone. And I remember that moment when he told me that it felt like a tidal wave had just hit me. And then when I finally learned 3 years later that I too was HIV positive, I remember just hearing the kind of la 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 while the doctor was telling me on the phone. What was it like for you the moment you fully understood what life was going to be like living with your condition and your disease? Andy, would you like to start?
Sure. Mine's kind of interesting in that I found out when I was 8 years old. I was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis at birth. It's a genetic disease, but I didn't know much about it. So when I was 8 years old, I had to do a book report on Christopher Columbus. And back then we had something called an encyclopedia. Many of you now may know this as Wikipedia. It's different, but it's heavier. I won't go into it. But so I started to read the encyclopedia, and I got to the term cystic fibrosis. And so I started reading. And most of it I couldn't understand. There's a lot of 4 or 5 syllable words, but then I came to a sentence that said, people with cystic fibrosis don't normally live to the age of 25. And it was right then that I panicked, that all of a sudden I couldn't breathe, that my heart had stopped. I was 8 years old and thinking, oh my God, I'm almost at my midlife crisis. What am I going to do, get a bigger big wheel? What am I going to do here? But it was at that moment that I realized that I didn't have just a cold, which is what I thought cystic fibrosis was. I had, in many ways, a death sentence. And so that was my realization of the disease that I had.
Wow. Suz, What about you with arthritis?
Mine sort of happened in reverse. I was a healthy 14-year-old kid, very active, very rambunctious. I'm sure my parents would add a lot more adjectives to that sentence. I was getting ready to start high school, and I was actually at a cheerleading practice one morning in July, and I kind of knelt down to help someone doing a backflip, and I felt something funny happen in my knee. Assumed it was an orthopedic injury. My knee filled up to about the size of a cantaloupe. It was enormous and red and hot and painful. And so we thought it was an orthopedic injury. I went to an orthopedist. He pulled some fluid off of it, kind of sent me home, wasn't sure what was happening. And then within about the span of 3 weeks, all hell broke loose. And this happened in all of my joints, from my jaw to my toes, my fingers, my hands, my feet, my elbows, my shoulders. And I was completely encased in this fluid, and I couldn't dress myself, I couldn't feed myself. It was very profound and very scary. It all was actually very helpful, because that meant I got diagnosed, right away. And at that appointment, at my diagnosis, I was given 3 pieces of information. They said, you have this very aggressive form of rheumatoid arthritis that children get. We don't really have many options for you. Your body is just going to continue to deteriorate. What you're feeling now is that disease attacking your joints, just gobbling up everything that's there. You're probably going to lose the ability to walk within a couple of years, but we can get you a powered mobility chair. And then probably most devastating as a 14-year-old was, you really need to think about your life and your goals. Because I know at that point I wanted to be a doctor, go to college, go to med school. And they said, your life is going to be different. You've got to think about what that looks like as a person who's going to have really significant disability and probably not going to be able to have children. Are you going to be able to work full time? So you really need to start thinking about, how are you going to sort of approach this? Now, being 14 sucks even when you're healthy. So being 14 actually helped, because I was obstinate and stubborn, and I kind of had a I'm rubber, you're glue attitude. And I heard them saying this to me, and I thought, I reject this. This is not how it's going to be. And I actually just sort of plowed through it. And it wasn't until about 10 years later, when my disease was well controlled and I was relieved from a lot of that pain and devastation, that I went through my sort of grieving. I really realized, oh my gosh, that 14-year-old really had a rough go. That was a bad time for 10 years. So it happened in reverse for me. And now as an adult, I can definitely look back and say, that was a rough time. That was really scary.
Indeed. Andy, what was it like to share that? Did you share it with your peers at all when you were 8? Or when did you finally start talking about it publicly?
I had a lot of difficulty sharing with my peers because, as she mentioned, 14-year-old, that around, I was 8, but 9, 10, 11, as you get older, you don't want to look different. I didn't want to look different to my peers, so I rarely mentioned it. It was interesting. We call cystic fibrosis an invisible disease, because if you look at me right now, you're probably going to say, oh, you look healthy, you look great. The look great sounds great if you guys have a chance to say you look great to me. But you don't see it. And but if you went to my house, you would see it. I wear a vest for 2 hours every day that helps me get out the mucus in my lungs. I take 30 to 40 pills a day. As Jessie showed his pills, I also have pills that I take. I bring it to every meal I have to use for digestion. Also, with my disease, I had reproduction. I could not have kids without the use of fertility. So there were a lot of things very different about cystic fibrosis. So the only people that knew, or that I assume knew, were my parents and my best friend. Those are the only people that I told, because again, I did not want to appear different to anyone. And I didn't start talking about it until after college, because when I was in college, I went through a long state of depression, not wanting to come out, not wanting to do my stuff. I got worse and worse because of the fact that I was avoiding all my treatments and pills. But all of a sudden, I realized that if I wanted to make a difference in this world, and if I wanted to live longer, I was going to have to take a stand and make a difference against cystic fibrosis. And so when I woke up on my 25th birthday, and I realized that encyclopedia that I read that said that I wasn't going to live to be 25 was wrong. I was 25, so I might as well start making a difference. So at that moment, the guy who never, ever spoke about CF wrote 3 books about cystic fibrosis, became a motivational speaker, I started volunteering for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation and started an event that would soon raise over $3 million. So the point of that is, it took me a long time to talk, but I realized that maybe the word different isn't a big deal, because different has the opportunity to become unique. And I found I had an opportunity to be unique and to be a leader in the cystic fibrosis community, and I took advantage of it.
Beautiful. Thank you, Andy. So we're at an innovations summit. Suz, how has biotechnology and biomedical advances, how have they improved your life since you were 14?
I'm sort of the embodiment of the improvements. I mean, the fact that I could get up on this stage. As you already heard, when I was first diagnosed, very few options. So I went my first 10 years on a pretty putrid cocktail of immunosuppressants and steroids and NSAIDs, and in many cases, the side effects were almost as bad as the disease. As a teenager, was developing cataracts, and my kidneys stopped working. I had osteoporosis and infection after infection. And then TNF-alpha drugs came out, and it was like someone turned the lights on. And I know all the rheumatologists that I know and love will tell you this is not possible, but I swear, and I can count on about 50 patients I know to swear, that I got relief in 24 hours. And I knew because I got my infusion, I went home, went to bed, woke up to get ready for work, and something was really weird, kind of eerie, odd. Couldn't figure it out. I thought, oh my God, did I forget an appointment? Am I late for something? Is someone in my apartment? I mean, something just feels odd. But I got ready for work. I go down to get in my car, and standard operating procedure to open a car door was to stand with my feet sort of shoulder width apart, use both arms, get ready, brace myself, because it was going to hurt to open that car door. It hurt to squeeze the handle. It hurt to heave the door. So I take my breath, and wham, the door just comes flying open. And it dawned on me that this weirdness, this thing, was that I wasn't having constant pain. And I started thinking through the morning, and I was able to lift a coffee mug and, put my shoes on and brush my hair, and it wasn't under this constant sort of cloud of screaming pain. And so it really was that quick. It was amazing. The other huge advancements, and you can see I've got lots of decorations on my skin. I had both of my knees replaced when I was 25. I did it in the same surgery. I had a wrist fusion about 10 years ago, and I just had a joint replacement in my left wrist. And surgeries are always tough when you have a chronic disease. It's not easy, but the function that you regain is so immense. I was actually able to complete a half marathon in 2008 against the advice of my surgeon. He would want me to say that. And now that my wrists are both healthy again, I can use my hands, I can lift my nieces and nephews, I can walk my dogs, I can raise a wine glass up even if it's all the way full. So I'm just much more functional, and that is all because of these advancements. I mean, it's truly life-altering.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Andy, you started to talk about taking pills at every meal. How have biotechnology advances and biomedical advances actually impacted your life as an adult?
It means everything in two ways. First of all, I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for it. You guys would probably have a better speaker here, so congrats. But here's what happened. So these medications got me stronger. They were able to make my digestive system work a lot better. But it's not just the pills. When I was 16 years old, I think most of us, when you're 16, you gain your independence through a car, right? For me, it wasn't a car. I got what was called a vest. And that vest was something I do every day, still today, since I was 16 years old. And what it does is it makes it so I can get all the mucus out of my lungs. And what it does also is it provides me that independence away from my family. My parents used to have to do postural drainage on me every day, which that's where they hit your backside, on the mic, their back, sides, and front every single day. Really quick funny story about that is I one time told my teachers, my parents hit me every morning. And you know what? My parents got over it after they called me from prison. No, I'm just kidding. They didn't go. But there were some concerns at home. But I used to do postural drainage, but now I had the vest, so all of a sudden I could go to college. I could grow up. I could get married, and I did, and have kids, and I did. And all these things were now possibilities, all because of these medical devices, all because of these creations that I never saw coming. I also every day do, or not every day, every couple months, I do something called Pulmonary Function. And that's something you only used to be able to do at a doctor's office. Now you can get this small device, you blow into it, and it tells you what your lung function is. It's incredible. And before that, I would never know if I was really, really sick. I would just wait and wait and wait and get sicker. Instead now, if I see that I'm getting sicker because I did this device, I can go straight to the doctor and avoid worst case of antibiotics and get even stronger. So I owe everything in my life. I owe my life to all of these devices.
Excellent. Thank you, Andy. So I'm going to throw you a question that we didn't talk about in advance.
I'm out. No, I'm just kidding. Okay.
In the HIV community, we fight so much stigma, discrimination, shame, anger, frustration. What's it like for you? Do those issues ever come into your life at all?
I think because it's an invisible disease again, what I deal with more often is people not realizing how serious it is and feeling very at liberty to say really stupid things. So if you don't know me well and I come into the office Monday and I'm limping, someone will pat me on the back and say, oh, weekend warrior too hard, and and I just think you have no idea. And so just the ability of people to make it so cavalier and treat it like that, that's probably my biggest challenge.
Thank you. Andy?
I think my frustration would be the lack of awareness for cystic fibrosis, the lack of understanding of it. And I get it. It only affects 30,000 people in the United States, but believe it or not, 1 out of every 31 people is a carrier of the cystic fibrosis gene, which means if those 2 people got together, tried to have a kid, there's a 1 in 4 chance that child would have CF. But a lot of times when I would go into the office, same type of thing, I get there maybe 15 minutes late, like, oh, late night again, huh? Well, part of me wants to say, hey, you do an hour and a half of treatments, take about 15 pills in the morning, do everything else that you got to do to stay healthy, and then get into the office. And you tell me how easy it was to get here. I was like, 15 minutes, that's an accomplishment. I'm pretty happy with that. But a lot of people don't understand that, and I get it. You know, the only problem is they all know I have cystic fibrosis, so they know that that's out there. But yeah, that is a frustration that sometimes I feel like, do I want to just act normal, quote unquote normal, and say, yeah, you're right, I'm 15 minutes late, I can't believe it? Or do I want to raise awareness and say, well, this is what I do every morning, it's not so easy. It's a tough, no pun intended, pill to swallow.
It is indeed. But what is the outlook? I mean, I shared with you what the outlook is for people living with HIV, both nationally and around the world. Treatment as prevention, PrEP to prevent new infections, national goals. What is the outlook for the future for your conditions and for your disease?
You want me to do this? I'll start on this one. Okay. So let me tell you really quickly, when I was born with cystic fibrosis, I didn't know this, but the median life expectancy was 16 years. Again, I told you I read about when I was 8 or 9, it was 25, and today it's 40. And it keeps going up because new treatments are being developed thanks to all this. Better devices are coming out. It's quite incredible. So what is the outlook? The most important thing is the mental outlook. For my outlook, is that I can do a lot of things. I never thought I could have kids. I never thought I would get married, go to college, graduate college. I mean, I never thought all this was possible, but every year it seems like a new dream comes into effect. So as far as the outlook or what I expect from the future, I expect everything. I want to have all the dreams that everyone else has, and I want to be able to live them and try to accomplish everything I can. I mean, that's actually my dream. My dream is to have no limit on my dreams. I remember being a kid, and people would say in school, well, you're going to die. Kids would say in school, you're going to die, you have CF. And they couldn't pronounce it. I don't even remember how they used to call cystic fibrosis, but I always closed every dream I had off because I was afraid I never would live them. And now that I have that opportunity, I am taking full advantage of it. And as I tell a lot of cystic fibrosis, a lot of kids that have the disease, yeah, your journey is going to be a lot different from everybody else's, but it's still possible. It's just you may have a few roadblocks you're going to have to go around, but it makes the moment of reaching that dream or that goal even more worthwhile.
It sure does. Suz, what about you?
I mean, I think the future looks really bright. I do think there's some work to do. I mean, I think all of the drugs that have come out for rheumatoid arthritis in particular didn't exist when I was born. It's absolutely changed the landscape of this disease. But I've told you all the happy stuff. Just last year, I had my first experience with drug failure. We don't know why it stopped. We've been tinkering with things and trying to get me, I'm back somewhat stabilized now. But I call it the shoulder shrug. I'm an informed patient. My rheumatologist is a very smart guy, but we look at each other and go, I don't know why it stopped. I don't know why the other one worked. And so I think it'll be really powerful to keep learning why this thing works for this person under these circumstances, and I think we're going to get there. My other area of great interest is in implants. Because I spent those 10 years without biologics, I'm going to need more work. I'm going to need a cervical spine stabilization. I'll need my feet reconstructed. And right now, it's kind of the wild, wild west. There's not some good stuff to choose from yet. So I'm waiting and seeing what comes out. And if any of you are interested in those particular devices, I'm happy to give you my pointers or ideas. And that actually leads me to one of the things that I'm most excited about, not just because I work in this field, is patient engagement and the idea of patients partnering with industry. Because why wouldn't patients partner with industry? We have the same goals. We want to lengthen life and improve life. And I think that if we as patients partner with industry, that means we change the course for everyone who comes behind us. And I can't think of a reason why anyone diagnosed with arthritis today needs to go through anything that I have gone through or will go through. And so that's why I think if we can do this together, I think we can absolutely make that happen.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, Andy and Suz have given you some wonderful comments, but they're available to answer questions. And we've got a mic right over here. If any of you have questions you'd like to ask any of us, the floor is now open. So who would like to start?
Thank you, Jessie. So these are incredibly inspiring words for, I know, everybody here in the audience. We're here to work on these problems, to work on these diseases. We try to bring the industry together to come up with solutions, how we can bring products to market faster. So my question is, what advice, what one bit of advice would you give to this industry? Maybe that's in an advocacy light. What could we tell Congress? What could we tell our state legislatures, our governor, how they could support? Or maybe it's, what can we do as an industry, as a biomedical and medical innovation industry, to speed recovery and to bring cures a little bit faster?
Great question. Thank you, Russ. Do you want to go?
I mean, I think I don't want to make it sound simple because I know it's not simple, but I just think it's doing things like this. It's having patients in the room. I think never be in a position to ask what would patients want because you already know, because you already asked. So I think just that culture of always having patients in the room. And I think the way to do that is to think about engagement as a relationship and not as a series of transactions. So once you build relationships with patients or patient organizations, that's long term. You're in it together. So don't ever make the mistake of sort of being transactional, asking them to something and then not talking ever again. Keep that relationship alive. I think we're seeing a lot of benefit from that already in clinical research. I think it's going to keep happening in patient-focused drug and device development.
Andy, what do you think about partnerships and advocacy?
I mean, these kind of things that we're doing right here, these forums are great. I mean, they're terrific. They get all of us together, and they get different sides to it. But believe it or not, we're all patients. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but we all have this terminal disease. It's called life. We all live with it. We all die from it. But you know what makes you feel better. And for me, what makes me feel better is to know that you understand. Not necessarily that you live with what I live with, or what Suz lives with, or what Jessie lives with, but you understand that we need your help, that we need cures for what we have. Yes, there are great treatments out there. Things are getting, quote unquote, better, but there's still no cure, and we need a cure. Because without a cure, unfortunately, the generation after me is not going to be the last generation of people with cystic fibrosis, and their generation after them is not going to be the last. I want this disease to stop. It's not just about me anymore. It's not about my sister who I lost. It's about the future generations, and I don't want them to have to deal with this anymore, and we need your help for that. So whatever it takes, that's always what I tell people, is whatever it takes. I don't even know completely what it takes yet, but that's kind of an unlimited answer. We'll figure it out, and when we do, I can't wait to the day that I always tell people at the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, I can't wait to make them all unemployed. So, thank you.
I so appreciated the comments from Mary Woodall and from Congressman Greenwood earlier about advocacy, because during my years as AIDS director, ACT UP was in my office all the time. and that advocacy is no longer, it's not in opposition, it's now much more collaborative. And the advocacy of patients with industry together is the way to go now, with intersectionality and bringing both voices together, because that's powerful. And Congress and foundation funders and others who need to be informed of the power of what we can do together is amazing. Because when they hear a unified voice that both industry and patients need this, it's almost, as Congressman Greenwood said, it's hard to say no. It's hard to say no. Anyone else? Questions for this panel? And tell us who you are, please.
Hello, thank you for sharing your stories. I'm Alexandra Tallis. I'm a graduate student at Georgia Tech. And so you had mentioned drug failure. So how consistent are these therapies for cystic fibrosis and rheumatoid arthritis between all the patients, and what is the possibility for maybe personalized medicine? I know they're heading in that direction in cancer therapy. Could you talk about that outlook of personalized care?
I don't have a good sort of bevy of statistics. I can more speak in the anecdotal from the many patients I've worked with, that it's not uncommon to be on a biologic for a while and then stop getting response and try a new biologic. And so I know as an arthritis community, we're incredibly interested in personalized medicine. I was just at a PMI meeting on Monday in Bethesda. I really think that's where we have to go, because it turns out even when we have the same disease, it looks so different depending on who you are and all those unique characteristics you bring. So I don't know where we are right now, but I know that's where we need to get in the future.
I would agree. Personalized medicine is the way to go, especially like cystic fibrosis. There are so many different genotypes and so many different ways people are affected. Some people are affected more digestively than they are pulmonary. Some are affected in other ways, sinusitis with their sinuses. There are just so many different ways that people are affected by this disease that we do need to go more on a personalized medicine. And I think that's going to help individual patients do a lot better. And as far as, how many times do things fail as far as drugs go, we hear all the time that there are these studies going on, everything's going great, all of a sudden, no, didn't get passed by the FDA, or no, it didn't quite go through, or, it didn't help patients when we gave it to them. Or we had one drug that helped, I believe it was 10% of the population, and it helped their lung function by like 10%. And that was so exciting for us. And then we had another drug that was supposed to help 50% of the population, but it only increased lung function by 3%. And you get all your hopes up kind of that it's all going to work out. I used to tell people when I was growing up, I used to ask my doctor, when do you think there's going to be a cure? And he would say 7 to 10 years. Well, after he said it like 5 straight years, I'm starting to say, well, this is starting to sound like a prison sentence. Yeah. 7 to 10. So, but you know what? There are drugs out there that are helping, and it is getting better. And yes, there are drug allergies as well. That I myself go through allergies all the time where I have to stop taking a drug, and we hope there's a new one that's close to it. And unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. So personalized medicine is going to be a big key in the future.
In the HIV arena, our triple combination therapy is made up of there's 3 different classes of drugs, and our physicians are picking and choosing between each of those 3 to put together a triple combination. I've learned that I am now resistant to at least 2 drugs in one class. And when my doctor has told me that, it has literally struck panic in my heart. Because I'm like, so I'm waiting for them to come up with more stuff that's going to go in this class, and he's got to pick and choose, and how do I know it's going to work? I just met with a small biotech company just a couple of weeks ago that's developing an FDA-approved drug for HIV-related diarrhea, because some of the side effects of some drugs are still can be very difficult on people. So it really is quite frightening when you think about the pipeline and where you stand in the pipeline for our lives. Anyone else?
I heard just this morning that a child had been born with genetic material from 3 parents, and the third was interjected to correct a gene. They didn't say which disease, but I figure a genetic disease. So I'm sure you all are very much aware of that and just wanted your opinion on it. And also, I'm sure there'll be bioethics points of view that'll have to be dealt with that type of situation. So just want you to comment.
Tell us who you are before you go.
Oh, I'm Janann Van Osdell. I work with TAMNet.
Okay.
Well,
This will be our last question.
Okay, that's a tough one.
It is.
Why did that have to be the last one? No, I'm just kidding. I'll just say this. Science is definitely making huge strides, and it's great. But I will say this, is that my concern is less what they're doing as far as, going through 3 people, the genetic type and all that. My concern more is to cure the disease that's already out there. That's my biggest concern. But I will say that there are so many new ideas, and newborn screening was something for cystic fibrosis that came out years ago that helped a ton of people, and people got diagnosed earlier. So my thinking is just, I would love to work with science. I would love to help anyone, wherever it came to. This particular one that you mentioned really is not in my boat, but I definitely think that we are eventually going to get to a point where we can cure anyone. Just a quick note, my son, when he was born, he had a stroke, and he, several months after he was born, we actually he had a stem cell transplant. And when he was born, a lot of people after the stroke said he probably isn't going to do that much because of the brain damage. Well, my son is now an all-star baseball player. He's an all-star basketball player, and he'll tell you he's an all-star football player. But point is, without that stem cell transplant, I'm pretty sure he wouldn't be where he is today, and that's science, and that's what I'm grateful for.
So I'm going to put my lawyer hat on and give you a very passionate but non-answer. I don't know if I have an opinion per se. I'd have to think more about that scenario. I will tell you, our family is replete with rheumatic disease. My dad has Crohn's. His mother died from complications of RA. We have vitiligo. We have, you name it. We've got a type of rheumatic disease at every layer. And I only have one sibling who had biologic children, and every time I see them, give them a joint exam. They don't know what's happening, but when I hug them, I squeeze their little elbows, and my fear is that one of them will develop this disease. And so I'm all ears for ideas like this. I'd really have to chew that one up, but I mean, I think maybe that's part of my motivation why I didn't have children, because I couldn't, but maybe that was another layer, was I don't want to watch these kids that I love go through this. So I love the idea of finding cures and preventing things.
Andy.
Jessie, can I mention something else really quick? I totally forgot to mention my wife and I also went through in vitro fertilization. So that was something that wasn't there years ago. We're very fortunate that it was out there for us. And again, that's science. And without it, two kids wouldn't be on this earth today. So.
Well, and that's a wonderful way to end this panel about the possibilities of what the next generation may not have to experience because of the work that you all are doing. So we want to thank this panel. Thank Andy and Suz. Thank you.